Welcome, everyone. This is Leslie O'Flahaven welcoming you to a LinkedIn Live conversation with my wonderful guest, Marleen Julien of Creole Solutions. I'll introduce myself briefly and then I'll invite Marleen to introduce herself. Now, you are most welcome to join us with your questions or comments. I have a few questions planned for Marleen. I'll ask her, and then you can join in with your questions or comments too. So again, I'm Leslie. My last name is O'Flahaven. My company is called eWrite. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm a plain language advocate and a writing consultant and a writing trainer. And I'm so pleased that I got to meet Marleen online. She completed the Writing in Plain Language course that I have at LinkedIn Learning. And after she completed the course, we connected. And here we are, a monolingual lingual person and a multilingual person joining today on LinkedIn Live to talk about plain language. Welcome, Marleen. Could you introduce yourself and Creole Solutions, please?
Yes, of course, I'll be happy to. Thank you so much, Leslie. As you mentioned in your wonderful introduction, my name is Marleen Julien. I am the owner, trainer, and lead translator at Creole Solutions. I did my first translation project when I worked for the Haitian Consulate of Haiti in 1998. But my career really took off as a translator as a result of two events. The first was unfortunately, the devastating earthquake of January 12th, when the whole world wanted to reach out to Haiti. And the second was when the governor of New York signed an executive order making it a requirement for government agencies and programs to have a language access plan. So we had these government agencies that needed to have translation services, but there were not enough qualified translators, Haitian Creole translators. So in 2012, I decided to focus more on Creole Solutions by offering translation services and also by training fellow Creole translators and translation technology and effective writing courses. Today, we have a solid team of Haitian Creole translators in Chicago, New York, the Dominican Republic, and of course, Haiti. And I have to say that one of the key elements that contributed to our success is the fact that plain language is a core value for our organization.
Indeed. Great minds think alike. How wonderful. Could you tell us, me and anyone else who's joined us who doesn't know, could you tell us a little bit about Haitian Creole, the language, and just a little bit about the diaspora of Haitian Creole speakers?
Sure. Well, Haitian Creole is the language of the Haitian people. There are 10 to 12 million speakers worldwide, and 800,000 of those speakers are in the United States. Haitian Creole is one of the top 10 languages of the United States, according to the Census Bureau, and you'll find those speakers in places like New York, Miami, Atlanta, and Boston. And also there are smaller communities of Creole speakers scattered throughout the United States.
And tell us a little bit about the written language.
Well, Haitian Creole, I won't get too much into the history and linguistics of Haitian Creole, but Haitian Creole was born out of contact between the French, the Tainos, and the Africans who were on the island during the colonial period. But over the years, Haitian Creole has evolved, and it has its own writing system, its own grammatical structure, and even its own alphabet. And the alphabet is based on the writing system is based on the alphabet. It has 32 symbols that represent the 32 sounds when you hear someone speaking in Haitian Creole. So if anyone knows, if you master these 32 sounds, you can spell any word in Haitian Creole. It's very easy to learn.
That's fascinating. And as we have become, we've grown to know each other online, I have been, I can't say reading, but I have been looking at some of the transliterations of Haitian Creole, and it's very interesting to see. So yes. I see several people online saying hello to us, a few of whom I know. Hello, Deborah Brown. Hi, Rich Hand. It's great to see you. And Greg Sanker, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad you're here. So, my dear Marleen, here's the first question that I have for you. Could you talk a little bit about the role that plain language principles play in your work? Because so many of the plain language principles that we apply are a kind of translation, a
Right.
translation from what's in the writer's head to what meets the writer's needs, but pardon me, the reader's needs. But what you're doing is a further translation on that. So could you talk a little bit about the role plain language principles play?
Sure. Well, to produce a high quality translation, obviously you need to have great linguistic skills, but you also need to have great writing skills. And that means writing in a way that focuses on the reader's experience. So, when I translate, I always think about the reader. And sometimes when the document is not clear, I have to break it down in a language that is readable. But the beauty of it is Haitian Creole follows the Haitian Creole grammatical structure follows many of the principal rules. For instance, we have fewer verb tenses in Haitian Creole than English. We don't use the passive voice. So so, so even if a document is written in a non-plain language, my Creole translation is very likely to be in a plain Creole.
Throughout the whole universe, the plain language communicators are weeping now. They say, oh, there's a language that doesn't even have passive voice.
No,
They're
no.
wishing they were you. That's
I
wonderful.
know this is happening. So to just to give you a few examples, because sometimes when I've been translating a lot of clinical trial protocols, and they have this thing, this sentence that I always see that says, participation is voluntary. So if you have to translate that into a Haitian Creole and you use the passive voice, it wouldn't mean anything. So you have to translate it into something like, if you want to participate, you only have to participate if you want to. So that's
Mm-hmm.
what's great about the plain language principles. They're so similar to the Haitian Creole language. And when I translate, I don't, like I said, I don't use the passive voice. I always use the active voice. And I also have to break down the words, the longer sentences into shorter sentences, because who wants to read a 60-word sentence? It won't keep the reader engaged. So these are some
Yes.
techniques that I use when translating into Haitian Creole.
Yes, this is a wonderful example. Participation is voluntary, of course, is a less clear way to write that sentence in any language. And in your on the fly plain language edit that you just gave me, not only did you make it active voice, but you used the pronoun you 2 times, which is
Right,
exactly what we want to do. That's
exactly.
wonderful. To think that the grammar of Haitian Creole itself forces clarity is really meaningful.
Yes.
So Paula has asked us, is this the same Creole people speak in Haiti? Is it?
Yes, it's Haitian Creole.
Okay, wonderful. And Rajako Cool Stalin says, hi, Leslie. I found your customer service courses really helpful and I appreciate your making them. Well, I appreciate you being here. All right, Ms. Marleen, let's go on to our second question, which you have somewhat answered, but I know you and I bet you have more examples to
Mhm.
share with us. The second question I wanted to ask is Haitian Creole a plain language? And I hope you may also talk about Haitian Creole's, I don't know, shoulder to shoulder proximity to French, because I think if I had written question 2, is French a plain language? The answer would be no. French is not a plain language. So, and
No,
Haitian Creole is not French. So we'll go back to the
no.
question on the screen. Is
So
Haitian Creole plain language?
the answer is yes and no. Uh, Leslie, we know that there's more to plain language than grammatical structure and word choice. Plain language has to do with how the information is presented, so that it's easier for people to find the information. So, in that context, Haitian Creole is not a plain language. but due to its grammatical structure and vocabulary, Creole, Haitian Creole is structured in a way that it makes it easier to write in a way that is clear and concise. So, but it's not a plain language. And to answer your second question, Haitian Creole and French are two distinct languages. Haitian Creole has its own grammatical structures, like we just said. It has its own writing system and it has its own alphabet. These are two separate languages. But since we were colonized by the French, our vocabulary is made of many French words, and these French words were spoken by the colonizers during the colonial period. So that French is significantly different from the French that is spoken today. So there's a big difference between Haitian Creole and French.
Well, indeed, indeed. When a text is created in Haitian Creole and then translated to English, just as a question, does it expand or shrink when it goes just length? I'm just asking about length. Is it usually longer in English than it was in its first source text, Haitian Creole?
I would say the Haitian Creole is usually longer because we use, like you noticed in my translation of participation is voluntary, because we use pronouns. We use a lot more. We use pronouns to make it more clear. So I would say that the Haitian Creole is longer than English.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Let's see who else has some questions, because it's not all mine. I want to share here.
Okay.
Uh, Khrushchev mentioned he's Haitian and he's watching from Argentina.
Oh,
Hello.
hi.
Yes. And Paula says, we have many people from Haiti in Chile, and learning Spanish is very difficult for them. Why, if they share the island with Dominican Republic, which is also a Spanish-speaking country? Do you feel like you want to answer that? What could you say about the challenge of learning Spanish for people who speak Haitian Creole first?
I personally, I don't have the answer to that question, but we don't speak Spanish in Haiti. We speak Haitian Creole. So,
Right, right, right. So, and I would say here we are in the U.S. with this long, long border with a Spanish-speaking country, and most people would struggle with Spanish
right.
also. Indeed. Okay, wonderful. Well, I have another question I can ask you now, and if you don't mind, I'll move on to question number 3. I'm inviting you to give lessons to others who are translators, who are plain language communicators. So the people who you'd like to share your lessons with, it doesn't matter if they are moving a communication from one language to another, or they're just striving to write in plain language.
Well, for translators, one lesson that I could share with them is, when you are translating a document, it's so important for you to understand what you're translating and not just guess what you're translating. So sometimes you may have to ask the client for clarifications if you don't understand the document, so that you make sure that you deliver the client's message. And another thing that is something that I always do when I'm translating is I use focus groups. I use people from the target audience to see if they understand what I'm translating, because I want to write in a language that is inclusive. And I think those two tips would help translators to make, because translators tend to speak their own languages that where we understand each other, and then when the reader is reading it, the reader may not understand it, especially when translators, we speak multiple languages, so we can figure out what the text is. So it's always important to get feedback from the intended audience.
The advice you've just given is sage advice for any plain language communicator or anyone who's working to become a plain language communicator. Number one, make sure you understand the content. And I often think of a plain language communicator as the reader's advocate, and sometimes as the reader's proxy. And I
Right.
even have a mental image of the plain language writer reaching a hand to the reader. I will take you by the hand. I will lift you by the hand so you can understand. And that was your first principle. And then you
Right.
talked about focus groups. In
Mhm.
your case, it sounds like you're actually testing a product for its intended users, just like we might test a new kind of mobile phone for children on
Yes.
children. Um,
Yes.
but the same principle would apply to any plain language communicator with maybe less formal language.
Mhm.
Ask an intended reader whether they understood what you wrote, or check with two of your intended readers and see whether they understood what you wrote. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. Anything else? I feel like you're maybe showing us the translation biz, and I really like it from a
Oh,
plain
well,
language
okay,
perspective.
yeah, and
Yeah.
yes. Well, for plain language communicators, I would say something, well, especially for plain language communicators who are writing for documents that they want to be translated, it's always good to have some, well, the first thing is just because it's written in plain English doesn't mean that the translation is automatically going to be in plain Creole or plain Spanish. So, and it all depends on the translator. So it's always good to have a feedback from someone who knows about the language and the culture when you are writing the document, to have your input, because something that seems like it's very simple in English may not necessarily be simple in another language, because when you count the culture and everything else. For instance, I had a client who came to me with a patient survey that was translated in Haitian Creole. The translation was correct, but there was one question about pain measuring scale, and it said, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you measure your pain? And the
Mm.
patients had a very hard time answering that question because the notion of measures and scales is different in Haitian Creole. So what I had to do was adapt the questions to and the answers to correspond to the Haitian understanding of pain, and that yielded better results. So it's always important to consider the culture of the people and their levels of understanding and the notions when you are writing a document in plain language if you want to have it translated into Haitian Creole.
Well, we have quite a few questions which we're just about to get to. But my friend, you must tell me, what did you substitute for this most familiar way here in the US of describing your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? What did you substitute?
Well, in Haitian Creole, we have three levels of pain. It hurts a lot, it hurts a little bit, or it doesn't hurt at all. We don't have, I mean, because what's the difference between a level 4 and a level 5?
Mhm.
How do you how do you make the distinction?
That's wonderful. In a way, you washed the silliness out of the whole system.
Yeah.
You know, you did. Yes. All right. So Rich Hand asks a question. Are there call centers in Haiti that handle English speaking customers? Does this create challenges for written communication channels like chat? So are there customer service call centers in Haiti?
Yes, I believe so.
Mhm.
But what kind of call centers?
I believe
Just
I know
for
Rich.
customer service or
Yeah, I know Rich a little bit, and knowing some of his background, I would imagine he's asking for customer service call centers. Hmm.
yeah, I don't have that information.
Okay.
Mhm.
Badu Bousseau, whom I also know, says, love this great conversation. In my experience, is a bilingual person too.
Oh.
In my experience, translators also tend to clarify the source languages they work with by simplifying sentence structure and terminology. Hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Is that true in your opinion?
That is a big part of my work, especially when I have a document that is not in plain English. Sometimes I have to do a lot of research and we do a lot of brainstorming to make sure that we use a term that is inclusive.
Hmm.
So part of the part of our work is breaking the translation into a plain language. So we are plain language practitioners by nature.
You know, you keep using the pronoun we, and I'm wondering whether it's a business practice for your company to have multiple translators working on the same document, is it?
Oh, yes, yes. We have
Mm-hmm.
a process of, well, since you asked the question, our process is we have of course, we read the document to make sure that we understand the language, and then we do the draft translation, and then we do the editing, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's the proofreading, and then
Mm-hmm.
the copy editing. So we have a different person involved in all of these steps. And sometimes the clients, since they don't speak the language, they want to understand what we translated it. We have to translate the Creole back into English so they could see how the work was done. So it's a long process.
It's a here, there, and there.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. Uh, the one person commented about the pain scale is what is normalized as pain in someone's daily life does affect the pain scale. And this person also offered another pain scale to mention. Deborah Brown asked, how hard is it for a person that speaks Haitian Creole to translate or speak French?
to translate or speak French.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll answer the second question first. To translate in the language, it needs to be your native language.
Mm.
But um, how hard it is to speak French? Well, there is a small population of Haitians that do speak French fluently.
Mm-hmm.
We learn French in school, but since we don't use the language in our everyday life, so it's more like a book French, just like if you studied French in high school, you know a few things, but when you get to Paris and you try to have a conversation, you realize that you don't really know as much as you think. So I think that it depends. It depends. I mean, how do you learn a language? It depends on the person's level of education. But a large percent of Haitians do have a receptive knowledge of French, so they understand
Mm-hmm.
French. It's just that expressive that is difficult.
Mm-hmm. Express in receptive versus expressive.
Right.
Jadida Bazin has asked, can you recommend courses or training for those who would like to become Haitian Creole translators?
You can contact me directly, and I'll give you a few resources.
Okay, wonderful. And here's Marlene's contact information again. So we're just about to wrap up,
Oh,
though I feel that we could talk for a long time, and I hope in the future we'll sit across the table and enjoy a cup of coffee together in
yeah,
person. But does
yeah.
anyone else who's listening, do you have a question you'd like to ask or an opinion you'd like to share? Please chat in if you do. You can always be in touch with me on Twitter at Leslie O if you prefer to reach out that way. You can be in touch with Marleen on Twitter at Creole Solutions. We have a couple questions. Rich says, I love this conversation. I'm learning so much. I've taken up Spanish again recently, and I appreciate the value of people that can speak multiple languages. I have an additional appreciation for translators. Indeed, so do I. And actually, Marleen, as a plain language advocate and communicator myself, the part of our conversation today I will take away are the two examples you gave. It was wonderful. So thank you all so much. Junior Duplessis asks, I'm interested in getting a PhD in Creole. What are
Oh,
some common pathways? Would you like Junior to contact you at your website or at your Twitter? Either
yes,
way?
please, Junior, please contact me.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And Rosalind asked, will there be a recording of the event? And yes, there will be a recording of the event, and both Marleen and I will share it through our social channels so that you can listen to us there. So, Ms. Marleen, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything you'd like to say to the people who are listening?
Well, I'm on a big mission to bring awareness about Haitian Creole, so I hope that you can join me. You can follow me on Facebook. We have a page called Creole Solutions. I want to bring awareness about Haitian Creole and to get more Creole speakers to read and write into Haitian Creole, and I hope that you can join me in that movement.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to say goodbye now, and I hope you'll join us again on LinkedIn Live. Thank you. Bye-bye.